Welcome to the OC154 podcast. In this first episode of the podcast, H and I are having a look at the Indigenous South African languages. So, during the month of June, Mokoena and VOW FM celebrated their birthdays, and we thought this would be such perfect time to reflect on the state of African languages, and to also interrogate the role that vernacular media plays in growing and advancing these languages. As you will hear, the conversation quickly morphs into a debate about how the pedantry that surrounds the use of these languages hinders their day-to-day use, and arguably their growth too, In this brief argument, you really get to hear how our respective life experiences and upbringings really shaped our attitudes towards our mother's tongue. So I grew up in a Tswana-speaking town in the Free State, and I went to the township schools from the beginning all the way to my matric year. And H, on the other hand, comes from a Venda-speaking family, but spent a greater part of his schooling years in Gauteng and went to a former Model C school. I spoke my mother tongue for the most part of my schooling years, and H had an almost opposite experience. And you can really hear how these opposing experiences filter through to our conversation and the views we take on this. This is truly a South African conversation more than anything. I'm sure many can relate to this kind of dynamics. At some point in the podcast, we also have a look at the vernacular radio stations, where we shine a spotlight on the state of these radio stations at the current moment, and whether they are living up to the expectations we have of them, and whether they will survive these technological times where the internet is taking over everything. At the beginning of the podcast, we also reflect on our failed attempts of getting into radio, which I promise will make you feel really good about yourself. This is a subject matter that is close to our hearts, so I really hope you enjoy the podcast.
Finally, my age. But remember, I didn't even try to get into radio and stuff. I don't remember you making any attempts, but it's just thing we always spoke about. But I don't remember you like recording a demo to submit somewhere. Hey, ask you were trying.
I did do a demo for some smaller FMs there in Limpopo, Choice FM.
Oh yeah, no.
Ashifa Shawa created these funny smaller regional local stations.
Yeah, like competing against Capricorn. Capricorn is this big station that he's trying to fight against, fighting for the slice of the pie.
With Energy FM, you can imagine just how big that station could be with a name like Energy FM.
Yeah.
I thought it was called Choice FM. So I did send them. I actually didn't get a response from them, but I think they were quite solid demos. But VOW FM, I also went.
Did you? I don't remember you telling about going to VOW, bruh.
Remember we did the first year applications. I think we did first year applications together.
And I did. I went for interviews because it was never demos with VOW. I think I went for 2 interviews actually.
I went for an interview, but it was after second, third year. I'm sure I was housecom by then already.
Yeah. Well, I think.
I knew the girls that were there.
Yeah.
They were talking about I must be a journalist. I'm like, I now
They
want
were
to
saying?
story.
They're talking about.
Our hosts everybody must be a journalist and follow up on stories. I'm like, nah, I'm not trying to be a journalist. I'm trying to be on air here.
Yeah.
So they give you that general knowledge questionnaire. I don't know if you got it, where they ask you about like the news, current affairs.
Okay, they did ask me that, but to me it was in an interview format where they like, I remember that week the big story was Bosasa and then Batabi Dlamini. It was just interview, but about.
They didn't give you like a
no, there was no questionnaire or anything. Yeah.
Oh, okay. We had a question and then we spoke about the questionnaire. So they did like a long list of questions of current affairs news.
Yeah. But when you listen to the station, no one talks about those things. You're like, what are you interviewing me for?
I won't even lie. I don't remember listening to it other than when I had
I'd pick up, especially when I know the interviews come. I'm like, okay, let me hear what the kind of guys managed to get in so that I have an idea. Yeah. Maybe like guys doing, those silly features what's that one thing you can never live without? Those like
sure.
but in the interview they ask you about the 17 million that disappeared in Bosasa. I'm like, Haibo. So why are you asking me those questions that have nothing to do with what I'll be doing once I'm on air?
I think it's because VOW FM is a part of Wits journalism. So I think they take some of the journalism students and place them at VOW for like research purposes, getting questions, news, and all that kind of stuff. So it's not a news station, but I mean, a radio station would still need to be journalistic, like for content-wise. This is stuff that's happening in the world. I'm sure for their news bulletins as well. So I think a lot of people who are there are journalist students.
Yeah,
I know a girl.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
As well.
You know a girl who what?
It was a journalist student as well.
And I don't know if you're breaking. I don't know if it's the internet or.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, just that you keep breaking your net. Yeah.
Oh, no, I was saying the host who was a journalist student.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people there were journalists. Yeah. Maybe that's why there's a lot of current affairs questions and that stuff. But I wasn't too sure how it helps them make sense of whether or not you can do the work. I still don't get.
I guess they're just trying to get a sense of, are you paying attention to this stuff, kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Like, yeah.
Because you must be knowledgeable.
Yeah, you must be reading at least and keeping up with what's happening. But when you listen to the station, they're talking about Kim Kardashian. That's my problem.
Oh. But why is it that we went to Wits but never felt like you must listen to VOW? I don't know if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, it never felt like, you know how a community station would cover the news of the community and you'd want to listen to the station for very community related information, which in this case, Wits would be the community. But I think maybe it's because of that. But I don't think they did that. I don't think they did what you'd expect out of in inverted commas, a community radio station, which covers because you shouldn't have to feel like you can substitute them for Metro.
Yes,
you should feel like you'd go there if you want to listen to something that is not Metro, something that talks about what's happening for example, Vuvuzela, as with all its shittiness, we would read it because it did that. I think Vuvuzela was not it achieved that. Every Friday we'd like, okay, let me hear what Habib said this week. You know what I mean? It was not absolute bullshit with all its flaws. But VOW FM never felt like that, bruh. It never felt like it. Yeah. It never felt
like. Which begs the question: does South Africa really have these small communities? I think South Africa doesn't.
Say again? You're saying that's another question?
We have small communities. Because I don't think we do. Where they pocket. Because you now listen to even issues that are happening in Tavanj.
Yeah.
Where are you going to get that?
Man, there are some really okay community radio stations, to be honest, but remember, I know home desk like Musupatel. It's not a very good quality radio station, but there's stuff you'd get there that you wouldn't get anywhere else. That would just be
sure.
Yeah. So it's just that you can argue whether the quality or not, but at least they're doing what is expected of them, you know what I mean? So I mean, even in university space, that is kind of a community. I'm sure if you're doing a really good job, you
should be able to have like men's race jubilee type content. You should be there.
So if it's done well, people
would do elections. You should be. We are recording live from the Housecom elections at men's race. Like that's how you should be pumping up that community. That's very true.
Yeah.
Because I remember I went to Alex FM. I was doing some stuff for work. We were teaching about stuff in financial education. Man, it was really. It was too big. They were dealing with more bigger issues than I think they should have.
Yeah.
As you're saying, you don't want to substitute it for why.
You don't want to say I could just listen to why. I don't need to listen. Yeah.
Even from like a music point of view kind of thing, because you should be bringing in those smallanyana artists who only you know that, Alex, that have not blown up outside. So even music-wise, I think you'd have to bring up those kind of artists. That should be your staple foods, even music-wise. But I don't think Alex FM got it right. Well, for the times that I was there, it felt very international. Like
Ish. But it
Roger
becomes
Federer.
tough as well because you also the audience, because also a balance between, you don't want to scare the audience away. I mean,
Which audience don't you want to scare away?
like when you bring in too many like local artists or whatever, people might say, okay, we don't know who these guys are. We want to listen to the music we are used to, which is mainstream or whatever. So the audiences are not always receptive. So a good balance would help. You know what Batukara used to do, ne? Batukara, when he was still doing like afternoon drive only, say he would, it's called, I think, the demo session or something, where like unsigned
Sure.
artists, that's exactly what you're talking about. He would do that. You bring in the demo and whatever, and now there's like a big movement of Sesotho hip hop, like tip, like basically that's almost where it started, where it getting this Sesotho, where it getting this Sesotho hip hop guys, and he started to slowly introduce us to them, because I don't think it's as easy as if you're bringing all the local guys to come play on air, because honestly speaking, sometimes their quality is also not that good. Doesn't mean like every local artist guy is making good music. There's a reason some made it big. Yeah. So you want to make it a balance. You want to, I guess, get the best you can get from that community of upcoming artists, but also
you must be searching.
Yes, sure, definitely. That's why such features are useful. Like the one that Batukara had. That's why they're useful. Yeah. So they do that. I mean, it became a big movement. I mean, now Sotho hip hop, Brand Free State is big, man. Like, yeah, big, bro. For you guys to even know about that is Tana now, bro. Like,
sure,
it's big now. Yeah. So they are trying. Shame, they are trying. Even them, these vernacular stations, especially because yes, there's community radio stations, but there's still national vernacular stations, which I think have even more power. But you find they still operate in the same communities that you're talking about. For example, this is not a community radio station; it's a national station. So they could easily make an upcoming artist big, but they could easily make it.
That's true. But where should they find that artist? As he said, they should be finding him from the smaller Tabanchu FMs.
Yes.
Tabanchu FM's radius should be enough for them to get the best guy.
Yeah.
In Tabanchu.
Yeah.
To send out to the bigger Venek station, for example.
Yeah.
But the throughput, because I do think, for example, Para did a lot to bring up people like Womakadzi, people like Venda Rap guys, even this boy who's in Black Coffee's album now, Una Rams. There's a lot of guys that I can't remember the names now, but there's a lot of guys that came out. Yeah, Mizophil. A lot of these young guys were doing a lot of music. So, but because let's say, for example, Choice was there or Mercado FM, it helped them move on to like Para, and then once national, it's I guess it's easy sailing from there. So I think that's what I like, though, when you can zone into a small community, then from there, that small community that you have can allow more growth, which I think VOW could have done that.
Yeah, they're not doing very well in that. To be honest, in the presenters day, they were not of the greatest quality. And they would win these awards, bruh. You know, every year they win like 5 radio awards, best campus, what, campus
oh,
this.
Shit. I actually played soccer with them. I don't know if I remember if I told you this.
When you say them, did they have a soccer team for the station or
they
something?
They had a soccer team. They had a VOW soccer team. I used to play for the VOW soccer team.
For it, not
for it.
Wow.
Not with the guys that play. Yeah, guys were DJs, producers, and everything.
Yeah.
There's a guy now on Kaya FM, used to play with him as well. Keys. I don't know if you know Keys. They speak about him on Kaya. I think he produced Skumba's show at some point.
Yeah. You say Keys.
DJ Keys, yeah.
DJ Keys, yeah. When you say DJ Keys,
even Mvangeli Nzoza, who now does breakfast over the weekends with Babi Muloi. Mvangeli Nzoza. This guy that used to
on Power.
Used to be on Kaya FM before, now he's at Power FM.
Yeah.
Used to be on Kaya, and Skumba used to diss him a lot about his voice. Mvangeli Nzoza, that hey, Mvangeli, we are ball. He did a bit with Prabob at that time. He was reading traffic.
Yeah.
He was also at VOW.
Yeah, he was also at VOW. Okay.
Keys was also at VOW. There's a couple of other guys. Even the manager. I remember the guy's manager. I think the guy's manager, the station manager's name is Mike or something.
Mike, the white guy. Yeah.
Yes, there at VOW.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to play soccer with them.
Oh,
Used to
okay.
play soccer with them. This is fun. It's a funny story actually. I even
Yeah.
forgot
Yeah.
about my time. And the time at the time it was to use it to get into the station.
Yeah.
I remember
And that also didn't work. Why did that work?
I didn't push. I don't think I pushed hard enough. The soccer thing was now just more interesting.
Oh,
Because even now I can keys and we'll remember each other. Vangeli will remember each other. That's how much we play together. Sometimes I even went. I think it was the time I went to the station just to chill. I even forgot I have a dream now that I was there. Like I just hung out there.
Yeah.
So I guess,
Hoping someone would say, okay, the person supposed to host didn't pitch up, those classic about DJs do
yeah, so
hustling
DJ
stories.
kind of
Yeah, like then that's where you got your big break. those kind of stuff. Yeah.
yeah, but I guess the push then died down a little bit. Yeah. I guess we just
I think you stopped caring. Yeah, I think you stopped caring it.
Yeah, I won't lie.
Yeah.
When the audiobooks thing came about, I realized there's actually another entry here. This you can use your voice for just more than trying to do links and back announce songs.
Yeah.
Now you can do like a full book, narrate, bring it to life, do with it as you please, create the characters and whatever. Then by the time I got my mic, a lot of content I did through the narrations. Then as I think like 2017, 16 is when I could see the Joe Rogan podcast game also coming up. Then I think we also started to see that maybe radio is not all there is anyway. Remember when we recorded with GT at GT's house?
Yeah.
Because what we did was like we still wanted to emulate radio,
Yeah.
but it was still very much a podcast if you think about. I wonder where that recording is. But it was still very much a podcast. And yeah, we're recording with this thing if you think about it.
Is that the one? Yeah, oh, that's the one, the original. Yeah, so which is something also another thing that's interesting. But do you think there's that? So because sometimes I get a sense of it when listening to a Nabo McG or Nabo Gareth, because well in South Africa the guys who are on podcast now, the guys who are on radio, that what can I call it, like that radio hangover, where they still have this they feel like they need to still bring in like the radio stuff they used to do, like that McG's game of his, those kind of where you feel like, but you're doing a podcast, you don't need to do that anymore.
Him very much so. I think McG, for all his quality, is very much a radio guy who's just happened to be in a podcast space. Hence, it's still very much driven by the interviews. His podcast is still very much driven by the interviews. He's gotten better by himself, but even by himself, he still wants to do a lot of radio sort of like things,
like a
effects.
Yeah.
That's very much a radio thing as well.
Yeah, because the last time, remember that, because now that interview, even though he recorded a long time ago, the one with Chilean, in there, I think he was still talking about he's still trying to get into radio. He's just doing this podcasting on the side. He even had some, I think even those games, I think some of the things he had on his laptop for storing them for one day when he's doing a radio show.
Even whipped out a file, we were saying.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking. I think that's why he pulled out some of the game, or I don't know if it's a topic or what.
Features and topics and stuff like that, like a whole spreadsheet. Actually, I'm really laughed at him.
Yeah, it's like, dude. Like, bro.
But he had a lot of ideas. No, McG is very much a radio guy, to be honest. Very much a radio guy.
And do you think that hinders him from like doing a good podcast? Because podcast, I think maybe does need a bit of different energy and a different attitude about it, man.
How different would you say? Like, what would be the difference?
I mean, we always say, for example, now if I was to ask someone who criticizes the radio to say, no, radio is dead, podcasts are taking over, the first criticism would be, I don't know, use the word fakeness or the staging of radio. Like radio has the links. You have to do things. You have to say this within 2 minutes before you go to a song. Just a topic, go forward. That, like that curation of it all, and versus a podcast which many would say no, it's just people just hanging around talking with no interruptions, just having as close to a natural conversation as you could possibly have. So isn't he always like on his back of his mind wanting to make a podcast sounding like a radio show, like that hangover, that little hangover from radio, where he's, like you said, the sound effects, where he has this need for, I don't know.
I think that can actually be a good thing. So it means that you also now stretch the podcast game. You're not just operating from a hangover, but you're also using what you know to make the podcast more interesting. So I don't know if you ever took time to listen to Chappelle's one. On
I'm yet to. Actually, let me note that down. Yeah, I'm yet to. They have too many podcasts lined up. Yeah.
Because Chappelle is a comedy guy,
yeah,
he's done a TV show. Amon, that thing is well produced, Joe. Like you can tell these are guys who've been on TV. They understand. They're just using audio to enhance the experience. So they did an interview with some other guy who they called, like, you know, okay, let's call that guy. McG's calling is very much a radio thing because you have him on the line kind of thing. Yeah. So these guys called someone because they mentioned him in the podcast when they were having the conversation. Then they call him. But the way that they did the post edit is that they made it look like this guy walked into a sitcom. So they had effects of people laughing, it would be they had music, background music playing.
Like a grand entrance. Yeah.
It's not a Joe Rogan experience at all.
Yes.
But just because he could do it for that episode, he did it. And he could only do it well because he's got TV experience. So that TV experience enhances the podcast experience that you then face and hear. So he will do some effects, some voice nyana, quote, play a quote, let's say by Barack Obama, where Barack Obama said a similar kind of thing, and just mash it together. So it's the way he's doing it. You can see this guy comes from TV.
Yes, but on that, if I may interject, like it needs to come with this would be a best place to do it. It shouldn't be this, we're trying to create a different version of a TV show. It would be like, okay, we have this tool we use on TV to do this. So this would be the best time to bring it in, but it's still a podcast where he's just bringing in spice and salt there just to spice things up nicely for the podcast, not to say I'm hoping my podcast would sound like my TV show, which scared if McG. But I don't think he does it a lot, Jim. I'll be unfair if I said he does that. He does still do a podcast, whatever. But it feels like he still feels like it's missing things if he doesn't have the radio things, even though they might not necessarily be necessary. You know what I mean? So imagine if Chappelle only did all the guests, all he did is did that introduction, even though it's not it doesn't feel like the right time. Yeah, you know what I mean? So
true.
It's nice. I see what you're talking about, because we can't throw, what is it? What's that English saying? The baby out with the bathwater. We need not. Of course, there are nice things that they can bring along from their radio and broadcasting experience and all that into the podcast, and just there and there where there's some good things they took from radio that they can add into the podcast. But it need not feel like it's not a good podcast if it doesn't have radio things in it or TV. You know what I mean? Yeah. And hence, remember, we always say, I don't know, Fresh can never have a good podcast. We always say that. Fresh can never, more flavor can never have a podcast.
Yeah, no, I think he.
You know what I mean? Because
they also know.
And I think they know. Because why hasn't Fresh a podcast now? He's left radio. He's a big name. He's got big following. There's audiences out there. He can do it, exactly. There are two podcasters in the house, like big podcasters, not just, you know what I mean? And he even himself, you remember that, what is it, but those conversations that Gareth had in his thing, where he brought in him and Abo Robert Marawa.
Yes.
He himself proudly said, my people will always find me. I remember him saying that proudly. And this is after he had been fired from Metro to 947. It's like, my people will always find me. Come on, Fresh, start a podcast and let your people find you. Let's see how that goes. Yeah.
Maybe he's recording one. Maybe that's why he's quiet.
Nah, he's DJing that man now. He's DJing. I follow him on Instagram. He's always DJing. Because at least with the DJing thing, there's not much pressure for you. Let's find nice songs and your big name, you're in the lineup, people rock up. Podcast,
Oh, yeah, they find
yeah, so they find him there. Do a podcast and let's find you, DJ Fresh, the big dog. Let's find you.
yeah, no, I think but I do think though those added elements are helpful for the podcast game, man. I don't like it, like you're saying, if it becomes too
Recreate a radio show. Yeah.
Don't recreate and don't try make it what it's not.
Yeah.
But the added bits, because you like people's experience, because I think that's what a podcast is good for. It gives you the people's experience. And I would like to connect this to like the piano sound, which I think is probably one of the best sounds to ever come out of South Africa in our era.
So proud of the pianos, but they are not.
But that's because each artist who then took a hold of it could do with it as they please. The way Risma Lisa does it with Zuma, because they've got a kwaito sort of like influence. You can feel it in the track. Vocalistic is more a hip hop kind of guy. You can feel it in the track. The vocalists can come in with their quality vocals and do it well, whether it's a trill or whatever, right? They do it really well, which then enhances the sound. It makes the sound, it stretches the sound in a nice way.
Enriches it, yeah. Yeah.
They're not all trying to recreate.
Saul would not be happy to you calling vocalistic but he shits on that man. Yo. No, he's not very impressed. He's not very impressed with vocalistic.
I won't lie, that was probably the best time that I thought Saul really broke down a story nicely.
Yeah.
Detailed it to us nice. No. So we're chilling there, and hey, Zolo's got a twang.
Yeah,
never forget.
No, he also doesn't forget. We mustn't forget. He also doesn't forget.
Hey, his twang is worse than McG is funny enough, and McG's got a twang.
Yeah,
but Sol really goes in, with it. Like he makes sure.
No, I think it's a good timing for it.
Sitting there and Vocalistic is there. It's like okay. I'm like, hey, Sol really can bring out this model C from First Loras. I find it so funny because he never misses sounding like it.
Yeah.
Which I think is also a function of South Africa's broadcasting space. It's not a good thing. It has made a lot of people not come into the space.
Yeah. The likes of myself. Yeah.
Because you always thought you don't sound right. And we are facing this doing the audiobook work that I do, right? So how do you read English?
Yeah.
What is the right way to pronounce things like?
How do you sound palatable? Yeah.
Exactly. So we do a book for someone like Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, who's at St. John's.
Yeah.
And we must try and emulate the author.
Yeah.
So we find ourselves fighting over the word apartheid as we are producing it, right? So like, we know this guy would say apartheid because he's that guy.
What about poem? I know you had a big problem with poem. What about poem? Poems.
And they actually do read a poem.
Yeah.
And I do say, it doesn't make sense. Poem sounds, it sounds too much, but poem sounds very much better. It's got a thing. It's got a South African thing about it. So you see, you find those words where you all get tripped up about, maybe it's not palatable, it's palatable or something like that.
Yeah.
And we don't have a white person like in studio.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? We're not producing this thing even in the hopes of trying to appeal to a way of speaking English. We want to give people an opportunity to just be as rugged as they want to be. But when we produce, we also find ourselves tripping over, no man.
You have to sound smooth. You have to sound smooth. Huh?
But that's the thing. What does
inverted commas? In inverted commas. Yeah.
What is smooth? So we get a lot of demos from voice artists, and you can see this guy's really strangling his tongue so that it can squeeze out that little bit of Model C English that we all fight so hard to get. Hey, it's quite a sad thing to watch. But I think more and more people should just come out, man, and let us speak as we speak. It can only help the game, I think, because there are those of us who say apartheid at the end of the day.
And then you are missing out on a whole range of content that you could be having because people didn't get in because they don't sound like how they should be sound. But I always said he wished to get into YFM, bruh, for his, like, when YFM, like the golden days of YFM, he was amongst the guys there.
Sure.
But come on, he's Batukada, bruh. He probably didn't sound like DJ Seb or whatever, or whoever was there to choose between him and the person. So that's how he ended up. And then now he's doing fine. I mean, he speaks Sotho very well, and he's doing very well, and he's still doing what he would be doing on YFM. So maybe then begs the question of, should we be now trying to what's the word? Should we be trying to include other variations of speaking English, or should we now be opening our minds to, you can have content in any language? Like, it's possible to have content in any language. You don't need to now say, okay, let's have a black accent English guy when they could just be speaking their mother tongue.
Well, we are in South Africa. I mean, nothing has fascinated me more than how Nigerians speak English.
Yeah.
There's nothing that has fascinated me more than that. They do with their language as they please. And that's what people do with languages, because the Sotho you are speaking and the Sotho your mom speaks are different. And the function is experience, where you grew up, where you went, what you did with your time, how much of it you spoke, how you mixed it, and ended up finding a Venta guy at OC 154, which must have affected the way your Sotho sounds, right? So that is important. I think that that experience is important, and I don't think it should not translate itself into English either. I think English must also show that it's also been affected by a tongue like mine, which speaks Venda. Because, so for example, I struggle with vowels sometimes, bird and bad.
Yeah.
That's just a function of our vowels. But you want that experience to come out into the English. Do you get what I'm saying? Because there is no one way. Like you said, you are in UK, but the way they speak, it
They
sounds
sound
like
foreign. They're the English, for God's sake, but they sound foreign to me. Yeah.
And then when they find themselves speaking to American guys, even if they're both black, it's not like there's someone who's saying, no, this is a black accent of it. English is a language that has variations. Much like Venda's got variations. If I'm speaking it in Joburg, the Zulu guys always complain about it between Zulu in KZN and the Zulu that the people speak in Joburg.
And famously the Tsongas as well, Tsongas in Limpopo, Tsongas in Mpumalanga, yeah.
Exactly, and the ones you will find going towards Mozambique. So we all have that.
Yeah.
I don't see why that can't happen with English. I just don't see why it can't happen with English, because for me, it's a function of a language. It's not this thing that it is in South Africa where there's just a proper way. Oh, you speak so well. It's not even like that.
Yeah.
It's not like that. So I've gone out of my way quite maybe performatively that work to sometimes say I don't know what the English word is and say the bit in Venda, and then someone will help me out. Because what I'm interested in a lot in South Africa, language wise, we all mix, man. There's nobody is just wire English speaking person. Well, unless they are English speaking, probably private school kids and whatever. But Mona Rakensa man, Akeri. Why? I think that should form part of what makes us our version of English, much like Pidgin English in Ghana or Nigeria. The language must always be fluid. It's not the same. We're not all speaking like Shakespeare now, anyway.
But then, would you take that argument and also apply it to the opposite direction, where remember the conversation we once had about how purist, I guess, the vernacular radio stations are about languages. Would you apply it, because they could make someone who's not speaking a good Sotho could make the same argument and say, no, well, this is my Sotho that I learned in Soweto, so I should be allowed to speak it the way I want to speak it. Would that argument still apply?
I think that would also help our languages develop even better. I think because language develops because you are talking it, and you speak it in accordance with where you are at a time. So Twasa FM, for example, is very much a Pretoria station. They say they speak vernac. but they don't speak any of the 11 official languages.
I have a feeling they don't. Yeah.
But they speak a version
Yeah.
that a station can sustain itself. Machita ba ntse ba re ka ntlela. That's how they speak. Or see you or whatever. Right? Rabua, whatever they're saying, right? But they help preserve the language in accordance with where it finds itself location-wise and how the people in that space speak it. There's no way the Sotho you guys are speaking on the border of Lesotho is the same as what's spoken in Lesotho. But you are speaking.
No, but that's a tough one. Is because now there's also a question of slang, right? Where there's Sesotho that's spoken, let's say in Lesotho and in the Free State, and they can both appreciate that these are both Sesotho, but then there can be a third version. It's like now this is no longer Sesotho. Now it's starting to sound not like Sesotho. You know what I mean? Where like now you're killing the language. It's no longer preserving it. Like you are destroying some way. Like for example, you start. I remember when I was doing Tswana in high school, where you could start to get away with just translating things from English and Tswanifying them, so to speak, like where they call them adding, where you like borrowing a word from English. But then even the word would have in Tswana already, you could just convert it and turn it into a Tswana word. And now you're no longer speaking Tswana, now you're just speaking Tswana in inserting English where you don't have words. Or even slang.
What is language? I've actually got a book. I don't know if I took it back.
Yeah.
Where I'm trying to understand language. So this guy breaks down how important language is in the human development. Language is probably what makes us separate from other animals, because we really can communicate and have full-on conversations, sit face each other, but you won't see lions or dogs sort of like for a podcast.
Yeah.
So language is what we use to transfer information. So I think we may be speaking from a sense that we've been colonized, so we need to preserve the language. I think the language should be spoken, because I know I don't speak the same Venda my father speaks. My father doesn't even speak the same Venda my grandmother speaks. The function there is the experiences that we all had, but we can all speak to each other. And when I'm speaking, my grandmother says, that's not how you say this, but that's how I understand it. But she also understands it. The function of the language is to communicate between people, and people communicate with their experience. So I don't think there's a way we can say
that's a slippery slope, man.
We've saved it. What are you saving? Because that's
a slippery slope. I remember Twasa and Phenduka on their breakfast show, they once had, because I think in celebrating, I don't know if this is when they were celebrating their birthday as a station, or there was some African languages month, I can't remember well. So they had a professor from some language professor from University of Free State. So they allowed listeners to call in to just ask. So basically a similar thing to that lady did on Tibo's show on KFM, where she just explained the history of things. But this guy was just explaining the history of the words and the language we use, or the phrases that are used in Sesotho. So the words have origins, and there's a story of how they came about. There's a story of how they ended up being called a certain thing. So when you no longer when you deviate from that, are you really creating? Is it like, can we say no, it's fine, run with it, or are you just breaking the rule of language? Because language in inverted commas is like a set of rules on how we want to communicate. So we agree, okay, this is what we are going to call this item.
But on what basis do we agree? Based on what?
Yeah, but like we said, how we experience it, like all these words will have the stories of when the missionaries arrived, there was this item, and we ended up calling it this. So later, when someone doesn't call it that, but they just not pronounce it correctly, for example.
Yeah, but the missionaries are not there anymore. I mean, Now,
Yes, but the word is still that word. I don't know how to put it. Like, you know, there's a